Man insults Clint Eastwood on a first-class flight, instantly regrets it when the truth is revealed. Man insults Clint Eastwood on a first-class flight, instantly regrets it when the truth is revealed. It was just another luxury flight in first class. At least that's what Jason thought when he boarded the plane. He'd done this plenty of times before. Private jets, cushy seats, all the bells and whistles. But what Jason didn't expect that day was the encounter that would change his life forever. As he settled into his seat, he had no idea that across the aisle, a legendary figure was about to make an appearance. One that would leave him in a state of shock, regret, and utter disbelief. Clint Eastwood. The name alone sends a shiver down the spine of anyone who's ever seen his films. From his gritty westerns to his iconic roles as the no-nonsense cop, Eastwood had carved a legacy in Hollywood that few could even dream of touching. Yet there he was, in the flesh, sitting just a few feet away from Jason. Most people would have been starstruck. They would have been in awe, maybe even shy to make eye contact with the man whose presence defines so many great moments in film history. But not Jason. Jason was different. Jason, a self-proclaimed film critic, had always prided himself on his unfiltered opinions. In fact, he considered himself a connoisseur of cinema, someone who could dissect a movie faster than most could finish their popcorn. Clint Eastwood's films. He wasn't a fan. Sure, there was a time when Eastwood was regarded as a force to be reckoned with, but in Jason's eyes, the man was outdated, old-fashioned, a relic of a bygone era. Clint's latest movie had even been a letdown in Jason's opinion, and he didn't hold back when voicing it on his social media platforms. It wasn't long before Jason's sharp eye caught a familiar figure in the cabin. Eastwood had boarded the plane, making his way toward the front section. Jason's heart raced. This was it, the opportunity to meet one of the greatest legends in the industry. But instead of admiration, all Jason could think about was how he could express his dissatisfaction with Eastwood's recent work. In his mind, this was the perfect chance to call him out. As Clint sat down, a few rows ahead of him, Jason couldn't help but feel a rush of arrogance. He was in first class, after all. He had a right to speak his mind, to challenge the man whose work he deemed overrated. But there was a part of him, deep down, that wondered, should I? But that thought was quickly dismissed. This was his moment to make a statement. And so, in a rather loud and confident voice, Jason turned to the person seated next to him, making sure Clint could hear his words. Honestly, I don't get the hype around Clint Eastwood anymore. His latest movie, it was a total disaster. Old, slow, and just not compelling in any way. I mean, how much longer can a guy like that keep pretending he's relevant? Jason's words echoed through the cabin, and in that moment, Clint Eastwood's iconic gaze seemed to land directly on him. There was no turning back now. Jason was fully committed. He watched as Eastwood turned his head ever so slightly toward him, his expression unreadable. Jason felt a slight chill run down his spine, but quickly dismissed it. Clint, after all, was just another person. Just another actor who couldn't handle the brutal honesty of a true film aficionado. But what happened next, Jason could never have predicted. Clint slowly stood up, his voice low and calm, but carrying a weight that immediately commanded attention. You know, kid, sometimes, it's not about what you think you know, it's about what you don't know. Jason blinked, unsure if he had heard him correctly. He was expecting a defensive outburst, or maybe a dismissive laugh, but not this. Clint walked toward him, each step deliberate, carrying the air of someone who had seen it all. You think I'm irrelevant? That my movies don't matter? Maybe it's not my films that are the problem. Maybe it's your perspective. Jason was speechless. He could feel his face heating up. He thought about how many times he had ridiculed Clint's career, how many sharp criticisms he had made in public. But now, in the face of the man himself, the confidence he had built up in his head was fading quickly. He was starting to regret his words, but it was too late. Clint took the seat beside him. Jason's heart raced as Clint leaned in, his voice a whisper, but one that could be heard clearly across the cabin. You know, there's a lot about me you don't know, kid. A lot more than you'll ever understand. Jason sat frozen in his seat, trying to process the weight of Clint's words. What was he talking about? What was there to know that would change his perception of the man sitting next to him? Was Clint going to reveal something about his career? Or was this just another old man offering advice to a young, cocky critic? But then Clint did something that sent a jolt of confusion through Jason's mind. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a faded, worn-out envelope. He handed it to Jason, who stared at it in disbelief. "This," Clint said, his eyes locking with Jason's, "is the reason I'm not the man you think I am." Jason hesitated, staring at the envelope as if it might contain a bomb. "What is this?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Clint didn't answer right away. Instead, he simply leaned back in his seat, crossing his arms. The air around them seemed to thicken, the tension mounting as Jason's curiosity bubbled up. The flight attendants continued with their routine, but Jason couldn't take his eyes off the envelope. Something about it, something about Clint, was starting to feel different. "Open it," Clint said simply, his eyes glinting with an unreadable emotion. Jason slowly reached out, his fingers trembling slightly as he took the envelope. He tore it open and pulled out a single sheet of paper. At first glance, there was nothing extraordinary about it. But as he began to read, his mind raced, the words beginning to sink in, words that made him question everything he thought he knew about Clint Eastwood. The paper contained details about Clint's life, things Jason had never imagined. The truth was far more complex than he could have ever guessed. Jason's heart skipped a beat. He looked up at Clint, his mind reeling. "What is this? Why are you showing me this?" Clint's gaze was unwavering, and for the first time, Jason felt like he was in the presence of something much larger than his own arrogance. "Because you have no idea who I really am. But by the time we land, you will." The flight continued, but for Jason, time seemed to stand still. The truth he was about to uncover would change everything. But would he be ready to accept it? Would he be able to swallow his pride and face the reality of the man he had so confidently insulted? The rest of the journey was a blur. Jason couldn't focus on anything else but the contents of that letter and the questions that now filled his mind. What had Clint Eastwood been hiding all these years? And more importantly, what did it mean for Jason and his entire perception of the world? The plane began its descent, and Jason knew that by the time they touched down, everything would be different. But for now, he sat in stunned silence, waiting for the truth to be revealed. And when it did, would Jason still have the courage to stand by his words? Or would he regret every last one of them? Stay tuned, because the answer is closer than you think. Jason's hands trembled slightly as he stared at the letter Clint had handed him. It was like a switch had been flipped in his mind. All his previous thoughts, the snarky remarks, the smug online reviews, the cynical critiques of Eastwood's work, seemed distant, childish even. He thought about the years he had spent crafting opinions, shaping his identity as a self-made film expert, all while living in a world where he felt like he had the answers to everything. But this was different. Clint Eastwood wasn't just another actor or celebrity. There was a gravity to him that Jason had never fully appreciated. As the plane soared through the clouds, Jason's mind was running in circles. What was in the letter? What kind of secrets did Clint carry with him that would challenge Jason's worldview so completely? Could the man really have something so powerful, so profound, that it would make Jason regret every word he had said? Clint Eastwood was a legend, yes, but legends were people too. People with lives that Jason knew nothing about, people whose truths often didn't fit into the neat, comfortable boxes Jason had built in his mind. The flight attendants had already served drinks, and the hum of the aircraft filled the air as everyone went about their business. Jason glanced over at Clint, who was staring out the window, his expression unreadable. He felt an unease settle over him. Every few seconds, he caught himself glancing back at the envelope, still in his hands. His fingers itched to open it again, but something held him back. The plane was a world of its own, a contained bubble in the sky, where anything could happen. Jason couldn't shake the feeling that the truth was within his grasp, yet still so far out of reach. He knew he had to confront Clint, ask him what was going on, but part of him hesitated. This wasn't just about Clint's films anymore. This was about Jason's identity. Who was he, really? Was he truly the critic he thought he was? Was his judgment of people, of art, really as sharp as he had believed? Or had he been too quick to pass judgment on something he didn't fully understand? After what felt like hours, Clint turned slowly, meeting Jason's eyes once more. "You look like you're about to burst," he said, his voice calm, almost amused. Jason swallowed hard. I don't know what to think. I've never seen you like this, I've never considered there was more to you than what I've seen in the movies. I've been so dismissive." He stared at the envelope, still clenched tightly in his hands. "What's in this letter?" Clint leaned forward slightly, his gaze softening. "What's in that letter, kid, isn't just about me. It's about you too. About every person who thinks they can understand a man's life from the outside. You think you know me because of the roles I've played on screen. The tough, unyielding Clint Eastwood, the man with no name who always gets the last word. But life, Jason, life doesn't work that way." Jason's throat tightened as he processed Clint's words. "So, you're saying this isn't who you really are?" Jason asked, trying to wrap his mind around what Clint was saying. That all those movies, all that macho stuff, is just an act. Clint chuckled softly. An act? Maybe in part, but that's the thing. People get caught up in the act and forget to look deeper. They never ask, who is the person behind the roles? What's the truth beneath the surface? Jason's mind raced as he thought back to everything he'd read about Clint, his roles as a director, producer, actor, everything that had shaped his public persona. He'd never thought to dig deeper, to understand what had brought Clint to the point he was at now. What had shaped him? What personal sacrifices, regrets, or victories lay behind the image that Jason had so easily dismissed? There was a silence between them, and Jason felt a shift. Something unspoken, something unsettling. He couldn't put his finger on it, but he was starting to realize that Clint was a man who had lived a lifetime of experiences Jason had never even dreamed of. "Look, kid," Clint said, breaking the silence. "I don't expect you to get it all right away. But the truth about who I am and who you are doesn't come from the movies or the internet. It comes from the things you live through, the choices you make, the people you meet." Jason nodded, feeling a mix of frustration and awe. Clint wasn't giving him anything concrete. No answers, no grand revelations, just riddles and vague philosophical statements. It wasn't the clarity he had expected. And yet, something about Clint's demeanor told him that this was the way it was meant to be. There were no shortcuts to understanding someone's life. No easy answers. But Jason still didn't fully get it, not yet. And that's when Clint spoke again, his voice low and serious. "There's something I need you to know, something you'll never see coming, but you need to hear it before you make a fool of yourself." Jason stiffened. "What do you mean?" Clint's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, Jason saw a flicker of something behind them, something darker, something personal. "The man you think I am isn't the whole story. I've done things, been through things, that you'll never find out from a movie set or an interview. You think I'm just some old actor with a couple of good films under his belt. But I've got a past, Jason. A past that, if you knew it, would change everything you think you know about me, and maybe even about yourself." Jason's heart pounded. His mind raced as he processed the implications. What kind of past was Clint talking about? Was it something criminal? A scandal? Jason's thoughts were starting to spiral out of control. Clint had lived a life full of twists and turns that Jason could never have anticipated. But what did that mean for him? What did it mean for their conversation? Clint took a deep breath and leaned back in his seat. "This is your moment, kid. You can walk away and pretend I'm just a has-been. Or you can listen to me, take what I'm saying seriously, and maybe, just maybe, you'll walk off this plane a little different than you were when you got on." Jason felt the weight of Clint's words settle over him. It was like being handed the key to a locked door, a door that Jason hadn't even known existed. But should he open it? Was he ready for whatever was on the other side? Would knowing the truth about Clint Eastwood destroy the illusion he built around him? The tension between them was thick. The entire cabin seemed to fade away, leaving just the two of them, man to man, critic to icon. And Jason knew that whatever Clint revealed next would force him to confront the very core of who he was. Would he be able to handle the truth? As the plane descended, Jason's pulse quickened. This was it, the moment of reckoning. Clint leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "You still want to know the truth, kid?" Jason nodded, barely able to breathe. "Then you're going to have to face a reality you've been avoiding your whole life." And with that, Clint handed him another piece of paper. This time, there were no words, only a photograph. Jason's hands shook as he took it, staring at the image, his mind racing to comprehend what he was seeing. And just like that, everything Jason thought he knew about Clint Eastwood, about movies, about life, about himself, began to unravel. The photograph was the key to everything. The truth was finally within his grasp. But would he be able to handle it? The plane touched down, and Jason's world was about to change forever. Jason's hands shook uncontrollably as he looked at the photograph Clint had handed him. At first, he couldn't make sense of it. His mind scrambled, trying to place the people in the image, trying to decipher what Clint wanted him to see. But the more he looked, the more everything began to blur together. The photograph was old, faded, yellowing at the edges. It showed Clint in a group, surrounded by men in suits, smiling and laughing in a way that seemed so foreign to the stern figure Jason had come to know from the big screen. It looked like a celebration, but something about the way Clint was standing, the intensity in his eyes, made Jason feel uneasy. There was more to this picture than just a casual moment. It was a snapshot of a past Jason hadn't been able to even imagine. But then, his eyes caught something in the corner of the photo, a detail so subtle, yet so powerful. There, standing next to Clint, was a woman, and in her hands, she was holding a small child. Jason's child. It was him. Jason's heart slammed into his chest. He stared at the photograph, trying to make sense of it, but the pieces didn't fit. He felt his entire world shatter as the realization hit him like a ton of bricks. The woman in the photo was his mother. The child was him. But the bigger question loomed larger. Why had Clint been there? What had this moment to do with Jason's own life? Clint leaned in, his voice low and steady. "I told you. You don't know the full story. This isn't just about my career. It's about what happened before the cameras even rolled. Before the fame, the accolades, all of it." Jason couldn't breathe. He felt lightheaded, overwhelmed by the sudden storm of emotions. "What do you mean? What does this mean?" he whispered, almost to himself. Clint looked him dead in the eye, as though he had been waiting for this moment for years. "I'm not just some actor you read about. You were part of something much bigger than any of that. Your mother and I, before I was the Clint Eastwood you know. I was just a guy, trying to find my way. We had a life. We had a future planned, but things went wrong. Choices were made. And that kid in the picture, Jason, was a part of that life, your life." Jason felt like the ground beneath him was shifting. His mind raced, trying to comprehend what Clint was telling him. Asterisk, this can't be real. Asterisk, it didn't make sense. He had never known anything about his father. His mother had never mentioned Clint Eastwood, let alone hinted at any connection to him. What was Clint saying? Was this some kind of joke, a prank to mess with him? But the gravity in Clint's voice made it impossible to dismiss. "I don't expect you to understand it all right now," Clint continued, his voice firm but compassionate. "I walked away from that life, from you and your mother. I thought it was the right thing to do. But seeing you here now, I can't keep pretending like it never happened. You deserve the truth. You deserve to know who I really am, not the guy you saw on screen." Jason's mind was reeling. His mother had never spoken about Clint, and he had never imagined that the Hollywood icon could be his father. But now, seeing the photograph, hearing Clint's words, everything was beginning to fall into place in a way that felt both surreal and undeniable. "You were my father?" Jason whispered, as though the words themselves were foreign to him. Clint nodded, his eyes softening. "Yes, I was. And I'm sorry I wasn't there for you. I made mistakes, huge ones, but I'm here now. If you want to know me, know the truth about why I left, who I really am, I'll tell you. But the decision is yours." Jason sat back, his mind racing as the weight of Clint's admission hit him. He thought about all the years he had spent idolizing Clint's characters, judging his films, and writing about them with such confidence. Now, those opinions seemed so small, so insignificant in the face of the truth that Clint had just revealed. Who was he now, sitting on this plane, facing a man he had once criticized so harshly? He realized that all the judgment he had cast was nothing compared to the complexity of the man sitting next to him. "I don't know what to say," Jason admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've spent my whole life thinking I knew everything about people like you, but I had no idea." Clint leaned back in his seat, giving Jason the space to process everything. "It's okay," Clint said. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, Jason. I'm just asking for you to see the bigger picture. Sometimes, the things we think are important, our opinions, our judgments, aren't the whole story. Life is messier than that. People are messier than that." Jason nodded slowly, his mind still reeling. The tension in the cabin felt thick, but for the first time, he didn't feel like a critic anymore. He didn't feel like the guy who had all the answers. He just felt like a son, trying to make sense of a truth that had been hidden from him for so long. The plane began its final descent, and Jason looked out the window, watching as the world below started to come into focus. Everything felt different now. He wasn't sure what would happen next, whether he could ever truly reconcile with Clint, or whether their paths would cross again. But he knew one thing for sure. He was no longer the same person who had boarded this flight. As the wheels touched down on the runway, Jason sat there in silence, processing the overwhelming weight of his newfound reality. The truth had changed everything, but there was still so much more to uncover, so much more to understand. And for the first time, he realized that maybe, just maybe, the real journey wasn't about the opinions he shared with the world, but about understanding the people, like Clint Eastwood, who had shaped the world in ways he could never have imagined. The plane came to a stop, and Clint turned to Jason one last time. "Take care of yourself, kid, and remember, sometimes the truth doesn't come easy, but it's always worth seeking." Jason nodded, his heart heavy with the weight of everything that had just happened. As they stood to leave, he couldn't help but feel that the story wasn't over. The truth was just beginning, but this time, he was ready to face it, no matter where it would take him.